Chloe, a grower with Ruben's Veggies, and I'm here today in our tomato greenhouse to discuss the science behind growing. And one of the most buzzing features we have in our greenhouse is the use of bumblebees to pollinate our tomato flowers. But first, in order to understand pollination, we first need to understand the tomato flower.
So here we have a tomato flower. The outsides here, these are the petals. The green bits underneath are the sepal. A tomato flower has male and female parts. The male part, or the stamen of the flower, has anthers. That's this here. The anthers produce pollen, which is a male genetic contribution of the flower. Now the female aspect of the flower is called the pistil, which has the stigma, that's up here, the style, the ovary, and ovals, which is the female genetic contribution. When the pollen comes in contact, so the pollen from the anthers comes in contact with the stigma, it forms a pollen tube, which allows the pollen to travel down the stigma to enter the ovary and fertilize the ovals, which forms the seeds. The act of pollination triggers a hormonal response in the plant for fruit development.
In a field, tomato plants are able to cross-pollinate and self-pollinate through the movement of the wind. The wind is able to move the pollen from the anthers to the stigma of the flower. But in a greenhouse, we have a lack of wind. So we use nature to our advantage by introducing bumblebees. Now we have hives like this one in our greenhouse, and the bumblebees enter and exit through the door there, and then they go into the greenhouse and pollinate the flowers.
The bumblebee stimulates the transfer of pollen from the anthers of the flower to the stigma. The bee holds on to the anthers and shakes the flower to remove the pollen. As the bumblebee visits the flower, the pollen sticks to their fuzzy fur, and then the bee brings that pollen to the stigma of the flower that they're visiting. The bees also collect the pollen on their hind legs, which is called the pollen basket. Those are the bumps that you see on their back legs. And they bring this pollen back to the hive for food. They also collect nectar from the flowers for food for the hive.
The relationship between the flower and the bee is a relationship of mutualism, because the bee benefits by getting food and the flower benefits by becoming pollinated. In our greenhouse, we monitor the level of pollination because too much or too little pollination will result in poor fruit development, meaning we'll get tomatoes that are too small or misshapen.
So we continually monitor the pollination in the greenhouse, and we do this by peeling back the petals to look at the anthers, and these dark brown bruise marks indicate to us that the bumblebee has been pollinating the flower, and we have to check to make sure that the pollination is not too light or too strong. So ideally we like to see 2 to 4 bite marks on each flower, which shows that we have the correct amount of bumblebees in our greenhouse and they are working.
In our other greenhouse crops, we don't need bumblebees for pollination. In our pepper crops, they are able to self-pollinate because the pollen comes in easy contact with the flower's stigma. While in cucumbers, they are parthenocarpic, which means they only have female flowers to produce the fruit. So in cucumbers, they don't need any fertilization to produce cucumbers. Anyways, thank you for listening. I'm Chloe, and this was The Science of Growing by Ruben's Veggies. If you have any questions or if you like the segment, please comment below. Thank you, and have a beautiful day.